nuestra parte, un honor estar aquí con todos ustedes. Aquí un mexicano, una paraguaya, un cubano, representando varias partes de Latinoamérica. Y también la poesía en español aquí en Estados Unidos. Yo voy a platicar un poco sobre la historia de la poesía en español en Estados Unidos, porque no es algo que acaba de llegar, ni siquiera es algo que se ve aquí en Estados Unidos en este ciclo. Es algo que tenemos que regresar a los tiempos de la colonización de las Américas. El primer libro escrito de poesía, escrito aquí en Estados Unidos, fue en español, escrito por el fray, aquí tengo mis notas, Alonso Gregorio de Escobedo, cuando llegó Ponce de León a lo que ahora es la Florida, y después fue Florida de Estados Unidos, pero el primer libro escrito en ese territorio fue de este misionero. Después de ahí, el siguiente libro, había mucha narrativa, pero poesía muy poca es que sobrevivió de esos tiempos. Gaspar Pérez de Villagrán, que era explorador, a lo que ahora es Nuevo México, en esos tiempos era el Nueva España, que escribió la historia de Nuevo México, la historia de la Nueva México. Y después de ahí, una serie de dramas que no se conoce el autor, pero bueno, ahí toda esta literatura era de la época colonial. Y toda esta literatura era sobre los confrontamientos con los indígenas, con los misioneros, el rol que tenían los misioneros de convertir a los indígenas, y también de la colonización. Entonces, por eso ahora, hoy en día, cuando regresamos a esta literatura, lo reconocemos que fue el español escrito en este lugar. Pero no necesariamente es literatura que ahora, ¿cómo diré? Ya que ya han cambiado los tiempos, creo que los latinos, aunque lo reconocen que esa literatura existió, ya los valores han cambiado, ¿no? Entonces, pero durante el siglo XVIII, que empezaron a verse aquí escritores de Latinoamérica, de Cuba, de Puerto Rico, antes de que fuera el territorio de Estados Unidos, de donde quiera, aquí llegaban a Nueva York específicamente, porque Nueva York era un centro cultural muy importante, era también un lugar donde la política había conferencias y reuniones políticas para poder platicar un poco de qué era el papel de los poetas en la política. Aquí José Martí escribió Los versos sencillos y el poema ese famoso que después fue adaptado como canción de Guantanamera, ¿no? También aquí se escribió la boricua, Lola Rodríguez de Tío, escribió La Borinqueña. Y también aquí se publicó en 1922 el primer libro de haiku, escrito aquí, publicado en Estados Unidos. El haiku, que ahora es una forma que bueno, todos la practican y todos la reconocen como una forma japonesa. Y siempre pregunto yo, ¿y quién publicó el primer libro haiku en Estados Unidos? Y nadie sabe, porque ese primer libro era en español, escrito por un mexicano, José Juan Tablada. Así es que ya estamos regresando hasta el siglo XVI al presente. Ha estado presente la poesía aquí en Estados Unidos. Y lo digo, esto es importante reconocer porque creo que hasta en estos tiempos siempre nos ven como recién llegados, o siempre ven el español como recién llegado, y eso no es cierto, no es verdad. Tenemos pruebas de que el español aquí se escribió, de que aquí la poesía se escribió y que todavía sigue existiendo, ¿no? Entonces aquí vamos a escuchar dos de nuestros poetas contemporáneos, y ahora se le voy a dar la palabra a Clara y a Alexis para que lea su poesía y hable un poco de ella.
Bueno, gracias por venir. Mi nombre es Clara Elena García, más conocida como C.E. Wallace, y yo tengo varias influencias para mi poesía. Primero fue el grande Octavio Paz de México, ¿verdad? Que yo leí un libro cuando estaba en la facultad que se llamaba El Monogramático, y ese libro me cambió, ¿verdad? Entonces de eso surgió mi primer libro que se llama Juego de Palabras, porque Octavio Paz pensaba que el idioma y el lenguaje es un juego, ¿verdad? Que nosotros lo que formamos palabras de letras que son la base de todo sentido. Y entonces de ese la idea surgió de mi primer libro que se llama Juego de Palabras. Y voy a leer unos poemas de eso, después voy a pasar a Alexis y después podemos ir leyendo. ¿Sí? ¿Sí? Exacto. Bueno. Juego de palabras. La caída paulatina de significado dentro de la masa de palabras en la página en blanco. Nudos y bucles flotan y desaparecen mientras lees. Se convierten en sonidos que se convierten en letras, que vuelvan a ser nudos y desaparecen en el vacío. ¿Y si el vacío es la musa? También una de mis influencias es mi herencia paraguaya, ¿verdad? Entonces yo tengo unos cuantos poemas y ahora un libro que está en submission con varias preses. Y me incluye también no solamente la poesía bilingüe, sino la poesía multilingüe o trilingüe, ¿verdad? Entonces esto es uno de mis poemas que se llama Ñanduti. Y Ñanduti en guaraní significa encaje o telaraña. Ñanduti. Raíces profundas en suelo nativo, la cabeza en las nubes, equilibrado en hebras de filigrana, atado por nudos de Ñanduti, conectado al urtimbre y trama del mundo, el olor a mate cocido, azúcar y carbón. Se suspende en el aire como una frase inacabada. Ella acuna la condición humana en sus brazos, tierra roja bajo sus pies, cascadas en sus ojos. Y después también tengo una influencia muy grande que son mis alumnos, ¿verdad? Como dijo el profesor, yo soy directora de una escuela para niños migrantes no acompañados, que vienen solitos a la frontera y están separados de sus familias ahí en la frontera. Entonces los niños me vienen traumados, me vienen con miedo, con temor, con hambre, con sed. Y sin embargo, ellos florecen. En la escuela nosotros trabajamos en las cosas académicas, sí, pero también en las emocionales. Y yo quiero que ellos sepan que las veo y que las escucho y que ellos valen y su idioma también vale. Y aquí en los Estados Unidos no es solamente un don o habilidad suave, vamos a decir, sino es algo más especial. Entonces este poema se llama Acentos. Y lo voy a leer primero en español y después en inglés. Los acentos sirven como fronteras secundarias, alambre de púa, murallas cruzando lenguas sedientas, separando la tierra de los soñadores del sueño. Un cruce del río, una pared de acero, un letrero que dice vuelvan para atrás, no te queremos aquí. La boca llena de pijarros y la cabeza llena de sueños, algunos más suaves y pulidos con amor en las colas de camisa, algunos agudos y recién quebrados, esperando las mareas del tiempo para rodarlos, alisar sus grietas y liberar su brillo interior, sin darse cuenta que las rocas que llevan en sus suelas se convierten en piedras preciosas en este lado de la pared. secondary borders, barbed wire fences on thirsty tongues, separating the land of the dreamers from the dream. A river crossing, a steel wall, a sign saying, "Turn back, leave, we don't want you here." A mouth full of pebbles and a head full of dreams, some smooth and polished lovingly on shirt tails, some sharp and newly broken in, waiting for tides of time to tumble them, smooth their cracks, remove their dusty shells and release their shining interiors, without realizing that the stones carried in soles of shoes become priceless gems on this side of the wall.
I will do a little English, and then I will go back to Spanish. First, I would like to thank the Montclair Public Library for the first bilingual event in this institution. There are constituents here in this population that are Spanish-speaking only, so I want to invite publicly the Public Library of Montclair to take the next step and then organize Spanish-only events, and events that are also for other languages that are primarily spoken in this institution. So, and if those members of the audience felt a little bit of discomfort when my colleagues here were speaking in Spanish, then you are for 1 minute in our shoes. And now you know what it feels. To hear a language that you may not understand. The second thing I'm going to say is I'm going to quote a wonderful mentor, friend, and great poet, Cuban poet, Gustavo Pérez Firmat. He says, the fact that I'm writing to you in English already falsifies what I need to say. My topic, how to explain to you that I do not belong in English, though I belong nowhere else. And having said that, I think I have fulfilled my commitment to bilingual education. And I'm going to read poetry in Spanish, because it would be a disservice to celebrate poetry in Spanish, speaking in a borrowed tongue. Okay? So, gracias, 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 gracias. Gracias por muchos acentos. Gracias por recordarnos que tenemos acentos. Y que todos tenemos acento. Todos tenemos acento. Todos hablamos con acento. Y si tu acento no es normativo, si piensas que no tienes acento, es que eres parte de una clase dominante. ¿Vale? So, and if you do not catch that, we all speak with accents. So, les voy a leer dos sonetos y un poema en verso libre, para recordar que el verso siempre es libre. El primer soneto es parte de un libro de sonetos que quiero mucho. El libro se titula Los Culpables. Alguien tenía que escribir un libro de sonetos y bueno, me hacía esa tarea. Nos hemos inventado los dolores de un tiempo inalterable que regresa. Inventamos el vino, el pan, la mesa, la distancia absoluta, los colores. Hemos perdido el árbol, la bahía y la certeza del amor temprano. Perdimos las estatuas y el verano, el parque, la canción, la cofradía. Hemos ganado poco en este empeño, la piel se nos marchita dulcemente y el lujo de morir en otra aldea bajo este cielo inmenso y tan pequeño nos hace erguir el pecho, alzar la frente ante el rugido fiel de la marea. Practicantes, notables aprendices, patrones de la idea más sensata, demiurgos de la euforia de ideólogos de buenas veleidades, herederos de oscuras latitudes, desertores de todas las virtudes, propietarios de nuestras propiedades, profetas, víctimas, conspiradores, brillantes y sobrios peninsulares, insensibles, misóginos, astutos, corredores de bolsa, pescadores, multitudes de paso en estos lares. La farsa empezará en unos minutos. Semi paper. Esto se titula esto se titula Los Pasos Perdidos. Y dice: con estos zapatos que conocen el polvo de la ciudad eterna, que intuyeron la gloria que fue el Palatino, que supieron andar las veredas insomnes de una hostia antica inerte, que subieron colinas y montes y estamparon una huella profunda que yo quise indeleble en la bella campiña cercana a Colleferro, que habitaron a gusto a la sombra tranquila del barrio dedicado a ese jano bifronte, que tuvieron tropiezos hasta ayer memorables entre los adoquines y las piedras que acaso, por el correr del tiempo y los pasos ajenos, fueron desnivelados en la ruta que antaño indicaba que todos los caminos del mundo llevaban al viajero a la Roma que añoro, que todavía recuerdan el susurro del río durante esos paseos nocturnos al Trastevere, con amigos que quiero abrazar a menudo, que marcaron un gol y luego otro y que dieron un pase celestial y una patada injusta en la tibia de un tipo que parlaba italiano y no era mi enemigo, sino solo adversario, en cancha improvisada en el patio espacioso de una sobria academia, entre adultos que fueron, ¿quién lo duda?, muchachos que corrían jadeando tras el balón de cuero mientras la primavera imponía su encanto, que en su afán de pisar los lugares comunes se fueron desandando con este escriba a cuestas, a conocer Pompeya, a husmear en Herculano, a recorrer las calles de Piano y Sorrento, que un día volverán a la tierra de Dante, a recitar los versos antiguos e inmortales que nos legó Petrarca para nuestra fortuna, y yo declamaré el acento cubano mientras el sol se acuesta por siempre en la Toscana y un buen vino acompaña a las buenas compañías y esos bellos sobrinos que no son consanguíneos de mi hijo ni míos y que quiero a distancia me recuerdan qué dicha, qué familia, por suerte, nos escribe con sangre, con estos zapatos que ahora calzo, queridos, jamás caminaré las ruinas de La Habana.
Gracias también por mencionar a Gustavo Pérez Tipman, porque maybe this takes us to the next another stage of the conversation. You know, there's Spanish and English, and then there's an in-between space, and Gustavo Pérez Tipman is one of those. But is it bilingual blues?
Yeah, exactly.
Bilingual blues,
Exactly.
claro. Digo, en realidad, a work of art. And Gustavo Pérez Tipman worked with, you know, we call it Spanglish sometimes, we say code switching, intralingual wordplay, Spanglés, all kinds of ways that the language is negotiated, but so quería preguntarle sobre las inspiraciones latinas, okay, nada, porque tenemos nuestros héroes que nos han informado de nuestro trabajo, claro, pero ¿quiénes son los escritores latinos o latinoamericanos aquí en Estados Unidos que os han inspirado?
Bueno, primero y último es Octavio Paz para mí, pero también hay unos cuantos escritores que he leído recién, contemporáneos, que están jugando también con el idioma, right? So, uno de esos es Marcos de la Fuente, que viene de Galicia, y él está experimentando con música, con arte y con poesía, and it's the coming together of those three mixed media que a mí me encanta. También me gusta esta idea del espacio entre idiomas, right? Because we have an interesting connection to language, right? We have a physical connection, which is our own genetic roots. We have an emotional connection, which is how we feel when we hear a language spoken. And we also have a nostalgic connection to our own past through language, whether that be an ancestor or an ancestry. And coming from a bilingual country, Paraguay, where we speak Spanish and Guarani, which is an indigenous language, and it is a bilingual country, to have English as my third language leads me to play in that space of using language to fill in those gaps, to find the spaces where one word doesn't necessarily replace another one, but it enhances it, right? So one language can enhance the other by being able to read. My current work is in 3 languages, and by filling in the gaps with words, it flows. And that's what poetry does, right? It flows, it moves us, and it sings to us. And to have the ability to use language to play like that, I think is a beautiful thing. And Octavio Paz started with that, and there are many other poets now that are playing with language and recognizing that English is not the only language that poetry exists in, that poetry sings in Spanish, and poetry sings in French and Italian and Guarani. And that is a beautiful thing.
I'm glad you said poetry sings, because previously, I'm saying this in English and you'll see why. Previously, it was mentioned that I have the honor of being the translator of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, and this is also poetry. And you just said that poetry also sings in Spanish. And at the end of the speech, he talks about he's calling the audience to action. He's saying, "Let freedom ring." And the verb he uses in English is "let freedom ring." And when I translated that verb "ring," the actual verb "ring" was not making a sound. In Spanish, that was equivalent to ringing. And I translated it as "let freedom sing." Que cante la libertad. Thank you for reminding us that poetry sings in Spanish as well. That's what I'm doing. Y con respecto a... Oh, cambié, code switch. Cambié. Con respecto a poeta influyente, yo no tengo la respuesta la tiene mi hijo. ¿Quién es mi padre reputativo?
Borges o Martí.
Exactamente, ahí los tienes, ahí los tienes. Entonces, yo no sé, lo sabe mi hijo, mis lecturas formativas en una Cuba misógina, en una Cuba racista, en una Cuba homofóbica, mis lecturas primarias eran muchas lecturas de muchos autores hombres. Por tanto, gran parte de mi formación como escritor vino de leer autores hombres. Llevo décadas y algo, sobre todo haciendo un esfuerzo muy serio para expandir mi número de lecturas y las voces que consumo, ¿no? Entonces, I want to also give a shout out to the wonderful Margot right there in the back with representing Watchung Booksellers. Please support the public library and also support independent bookstores.
Yes.
And stop buying things on that store that I'm not going to mention. Please support. And I do have the joy of being the coordinator of a Spanish-only book club in Spanish. Whoa. I am the coordinator of a Spanish-only book club in Spanish, because that's how we like tautological expression. I have a member of the audience here who is a member of the club. Do you remember what's the rate that we read, what do we read in the club? Who do we read?
¿A mí?
Yeah?
¿Qué?
¿Qué leemos en el club de lectura?
¿Qué leemos?
Sí.
De mujeres de Latinoamérica.
What do we read?
De mujeres. Solamente mujeres.
So I am trying to unlearn the notion of only reading men. So I've been since 2018, 2019 or so, I've been running a book club in which all we do, or mainly what we do, is read women. So, not credentialing, saying, correcting a lack of vision.
Diles por qué es el Watson, solo ahí.
Oh, thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. And I will say this in English because it has meaning.
Yeah.
Okay, so I run a literary book club out of Watson Booksellers, and this would seem that this is a literary act. It is not. It is mainly a political act. Why? Because Montclair is a space in which Spanish as a language needs to be heard as a literary source. This is not only, thank you, thank you. It's not only the language that you hear in kitchens, in gardens. There's nothing wrong with speaking a language that is utilitarian and to have a language that serves a purpose. But this language was spoken by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz.
Yes.
So that's why I have it here. Thank you. Margot, thank you for giving us the space. Could not thank you enough. And now, flowers. Bubbles.
No?
Yeah, really wonderful, Clara Elena, what you are doing with these kids, immigrants. In general, I think immigrants, we could say that immigrants are like turtles, in the sense that they always bring their dreams, a fiction, a history, and it's a shell that they bring with them. But what is interesting is that eventually these kids, they grow up and produce a process of transculturation in the American society. And they transform the society in such a way that contribute so much to the progress of this country. So when people think that they are robbing or they are taking away something from the white people, they don't really know that in one way or another, these kids, when they fulfill their dreams, they will end up contributing so much to this country. And I think what you are doing with the kids, making this kind of oral history, contribute very much to their well-being, but at the same time, it contributes very much to the well-being of this country.
Thank you. And to respond to that too, I want to also let you know that in my school, I've developed a curriculum that is culturally relevant, which means for me that we are only reading the works of Latina women. Sandra Cisneros, Alejandra Diaz, and so many others. So that is important to me, and also for them, and to teach them to use their voice to tell their story. So we are currently working on a graphic novel project with them, where they get to illustrate and write their own stories, which I'm hoping to someday also have published, so that their stories can be a part of our narrative, of our culture, of our experience, because not only are they very powerful stories, but they are incredibly prolific writers themselves. So it's very incredible things.
So I was gonna, gracias, Professor Zapata. Esa metáfora de la tortuga. Duran Saldúa actually writes about this as well, and he says that immigrants are also like the turtles because we carry our homes wherever we go, right? Muy bien, muy bien. Y también me recuerda que es este cambio de perspectiva, ¿no? Hay que cambiar eso, the change perspective. And here's another sort of segue. into translation. Because you always hear, when something is translated, what is lost in translation? That's always the question. But the question is never what is gained in translation, right? So maybe, Alex, maybe you can speak to that a little bit?
I would love to do so. In fact, I had the audacity of translating a novel into English when I had no business doing that. About 11 or 12 years ago, 2008 or 2009, it was published. Valerie, thank you for correcting the prepositions, which you were great. I believe that the devil does reside in the details, and prepositions are the work of the devil. And I will stand by that truth until proven otherwise. And I did write an afterword for that publication of a book by Cuban author Miguel Correa Mujica. The title of the book is Al Norte del Infierno, and I translated it as North of Hell. And the title of my afterword is precisely Found in Translation. Found in Translation. And let's do quickly here an experiment. Raise your hand if you're familiar with any of the following works. War and Peace. War and Peace, 100 Years of Solitude. El Aleph, Mahabharata, the Quran, the Holy Bible. Yeah, you're talking about translations. Unless maybe if you did not read them in Aramaic or Arabic or Spanish or so then the wonderful poet and writer Irene Vallejo, whose work I highly recommend, and she has a wonderful book entitled Papyrus, which is out, has been out in English in a phenomenal translation, and she tracks the history of the book in the Middle Ages as an artifact, and how it went from the actual papyri into this beautiful thing we're holding here today. And at some point in one of the major gems she drops in that book, she says that translations made us not only who we are, but other people. Because anytime you engage with a word in translation, Milo, why do we learn language? What's a word? What are we practicing? Say it. That's my son. He knows that when we say, what is a word? Say it again.
Empathy.
I love this kid. I really do. And I embarrass him publicly with my love. And yes, it is speaking another language, and therefore reading in another language makes you see the world through someone else's lens, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and if that is not empathy, again, please, at the end of this talk, come and explain it to me.
And even more than that too, language is what gives us meaning, and more than meaning, it gives us vision, right? We aren't able to see something until we can name it. And something that fascinates me and has always fascinated me is the origin of words and how they contribute to society, and whether or not we as a society can even see things with our minds and our brains, right, until we have a word for that in our language. And one of the earliest examples of that is the color blue. The color blue was not described in Homer's texts, the Odyssey and the Iliad. The color blue was not described in any literature up until, I believe it was the 1800s. And at that point, the word blue came into the consciousness of people. In fact, Homer described the ocean as wine dark. So he saw purple, right? He saw reddish. But did he see the color blue? Did we as a society see the color blue? They've searched texts in Chinese, they've searched texts in Greek, in Rome, in so many other languages, Latin, right? I completely forgot the word Latin. But the word blue didn't exist. And therefore it didn't exist for us. It didn't exist for humankind, the color blue. So language is just, it's such a fascinating play on our minds.
Creo que hay más comentarios o other questions.
There is something fascinating about literature in general, and Harold Bloom, which is an American critic, he always said that every act of reading is an act of misreading. And what he really meant is not that we don't read well the text, but rather that when you read a text, you never exhaust all the meanings of the text. And what is fascinating, for instance, is that in China, in Japan, in many countries, in the Arabic countries, they have translations of Don Quixote, for instance, no? A book that was written in the 17th century. So the question is always, what is there? What is in this particular text that is still is relevant for these people, which, is very foreign to them, like the Chinese culture or the Japanese culture, no? But at the same time, being read in the 21st century. So the fascinating thing is that probably one possible answer is that certain texts, they have something that Aristotle used to call universals, meaning certain kind of things, topics, or ideas, or concepts that are common to humanity, like the idea of love, for instance, or justice, or jealousy, or vengeance, or things like that. So there is always this relationship between what is universal and make us human and give us a sense of community. And on the other hand, there is a kind of dialectic between that universal and what we as individuals perceive in every particular text as a singularity. So in such a way that there are texts that never exhaust the capability of moving us, even if those texts were written like the Mio-Cid in the 11th century, for instance. No? And so it is true that translation is, in that sense, very important, because translation make possible to read texts that belong to a totally different culture. Like, for instance, I am a passionate reader of Murakami, a Japanese reader. I'm pretty sure, even though my mother is from Asia, I never will be able to learn Japanese. But at least I know that in translation, and I read him in Spanish, I will be able to grasp something of the, or I pretend to grasp something of the Japanese culture, And,
I wanted to, another connection to everything we've been saying here. Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice. Right? And I said, well, what if you can't travel? And you know what his answer was? You read. And there it goes. There it goes. The travel is fatal to prejudice, so is reading.
So is it time for talk back?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to do
Oh,
more?
anybody, any questions or any?
Hi, thanks everybody for coming. This was really a great conversation. I'm curious, you've all, written in English and in Spanish. Do you ever sit down to write a poem, start it in English and think, oh, no, wait, this has to be in Spanish? Or do you find, is there a different part of your brain that is activated when you're working in one language versus the other? How permeable are the borders in your mind between these languages?
For me, it's more like a web or a mesh or a net, right? I like to, like I said, bring in different languages depending on how I want my poetry to sound or look or shape itself. But I do think that there is, for this, I will give all the credit to Alexis, because translation is hard, right? Even for people who have studied for years, being able to take something like poetry and translate it is very difficult, right? So being able to switch your brain from metaphor to metaphor in different languages doesn't always work like that, right? So I think that it's a mix, right? Sometimes we pull in from different sources. Sometimes you start something and say, oh no, this would sound so much better in Spanish, which happens to me all the time because everything sounds better in Spanish. But it's true, right? Cierto. But I think that also there is a shift in your brain when you go from one language to another, the code switching or whatever you want to call it. But I think that writing in multiple languages can stretch your brain as well and really give you, it's a great mental exercise, I think, at times.
No, I teach language, so this is a little self-serving, but there are studies out there that demonstrate that speaking multiple languages, and particularly learning a language late, whatever late means by our standards, in life can help with keeping the brain active. So there are physiological components that are affected by doing that exercise. I would say was it Kate, the one who asked the question? Yes, thank you. So thank you also for coordinating. Thank you for all the work you did behind the scenes. So again, everybody, let up for Kate. Come on. Come on. You make this possible, you get your flowers. Okay. So, no, in my case, I am very genre specific. So for me, English is a language for nonfiction, and I tend to be a little more long-winded in Spanish. I don't know if you've seen the difference, but the poem that I read you was one sentence. That poem was one sentence in Spanish. And in English, I tend to be a little more pragmatic. I tend to cut across the brain and get to the point. So for poetry, I read a lot of poetry. Recently, I don't know why, but I only recently discovered Mary Elliott. Mike, read that woman. It's brilliant. And I consume a lot of poetry in English, but I tend to read more, to write more poetry in Spanish. I have only written one poem in English, which was the long-winded poem that I read in Spanish. I rewrote it in English. It was not necessarily a translation, although it is the same poem, but it is reimagined. So how about you? What do you do?
English. My literary education is in English, so I read English. There are only 2 times that even I have been reminded that English is my second language. One is I can only do math in my head in Spanish, because I can count faster in Spanish. And secondly, which is why I laughed when you said it, I can still, after all these years, after how many books written, I still have not mastered the preposition.
The devil conceals. It's behind. Not good, good intentions and prepositions.
Why is that in English?
In a car, on a plane, in a plane.
Arrive at else.
On a boat, in a boat. Make it make sense. Base, bas. Why? Same letters. I love English.
Yeah. English is one.
More questions, come on. And you, pueden hablar también, también se habla español. Anche parliamo l'italiano. Eu falo un poquinho de português. I'm flexing, Mario. I know.
Cuando el profesor estaba hablando de leer novelas en otros idiomas y para aprender un poquito más de la cultura y todo eso, recordé de porque yo soy maestra de español también, y yo enseñaba los cuentos de Ana María Matute, y recuerdo que cuando yo enseñaba sobre la vida de Ana María Matute para presentar los cuentos y qué sé yo, una cosa que ella había hecho era que había aprendido una multitud de idiomas para poder leer las novelas de sus autores preferidos extranjeros en su propio idioma. Que claro, no sé cuánto tiempo tendríamos nosotros para hacer eso, pero fue una cosa interesante, curiosa.
Una pregunta en español, por favor, con tanta gente hispanohablante que hay acá, una pregunta. Adelante, adelante. Los latinos de Latinos of Montclair, thank you so much. Latinos of Montclair, get your flowers. Thank you so much for making this event a dream. It was a dream deferred, like Langston Hughes, and now it is a dream that is becoming. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Cuando vi el libro
Sí.
de Martin Luther King, la traducción,
Sí.
mi pedido sería que si leo un poquito, porque es extraordinario si hay tiempo.
Oh wow, I can't say no to that.
Es extraordinario.
I will read the last few sentences, and I cannot say no to that. It's not in me. You know what? I will go back to that. I opened it exactly.
You did, I saw that.
Did you
Crazy.
see that?
Yeah.
I opened it exactly on the page that I had quoted by heart before. So I'm going to give you the wonderful, the late, the murdered at age 39, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream, because we can also dream in Spanish. Que cante la libertad desde las majestuosas montañas de Nueva York. Que cante la libertad desde los altos montes de Allegheny, en Pensilvania. Que cante la libertad desde las nevadas montañas rocosas de Colorado. Que cante la libertad desde las sinuosas laderas de California. Pero no solo eso. Que cante la libertad desde la montaña de piedra en Georgia. Que cante la libertad desde la montaña del Mirador en Tennessee. Que cante la libertad desde cada cerro y cada lona de Mississippi. Desde las faldas de todas las montañas, que cante la libertad. Y cuando esto ocurra y cuando permitamos que cante la libertad, cuando le permitamos que cante desde cada pueblo y cada aldea, desde cada estado y cada ciudad, podremos acelerar ese día en el que todas las criaturas de Dios, blancos y negros, judíos y gentiles, protestantes y católicos, podrán tomarse de las manos y entonar las palabras de ese viejo espiritual negro. Libres al fin. Libres al fin. Gracias a Dios Todopoderoso. Libres al fin. Somos libres al fin.
Good.
That was a good segue for my question, Alexis. Do you dream in Spanish?
There's a wonderful novel by the one and only Cristina Garcia, and the novel, the title is Dreaming in Cuban. And what a beautiful title. A few years ago, I caught myself inserting an adverb in my answer to where are you from, and I used to say I am originally from Cuba, and then I wondered out loud in an essay which I wrote in English because it's the genre for the language for that specific language, and I wondered when did my origin become an action? When did I stop being? Why was I saying I am originally from Cuba as opposed to I'm from Cuba? When did I need to qualify that I am from Cuba? So I dream in Spanish, I dream in English. My dreams are all over the place. Yeah, so they're not that discriminating. They come and go, and they mix there in a way that they do not mix it. But let me pass that on, because I have trilingual people, polyglots in here. So
Bueno, yo trabajo en español, yo casi todos los días estoy hablando en español, así con mis niños, sí. Entonces depende del sueño, ¿verdad? Porque si estoy soñando con mi trabajo, por ejemplo, está en español. And if I'm with some of the people in my life who speak English, it's in English. Depende de la persona que aparece en mis sueños.
Yeah, you know, when I dream about my relatives who have passed on, I know that I'm dreaming in Spanish because if they speak English, I think I'd be like, wait a minute.
So I do want to go back to a source I have mentioned before, the wonderful Gustavo Benefit Matt, author of Life in the Hyphen, who is exploring that notion of living in that liminal space between Cuban and American. And in one of his books, I read with my senior and junior classes in high school. The title is 50 Lecciones de Exilio y Desexilio. He wonders, what would it be if I loved my sons, my children? Because now he says hijos, and now I don't know how gender that is, because Spanish is a gender language. And he says, I wonder how would it be if I loved my children in Spanish. I know how it is to love my son in Spanish, and it's a beautiful thing.